femme qui dou, femme qui dou, on dit marcher quand elle m'a porté bas. Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, on dit marcher quand elle m'a porté bas.
Tudo que são pode mamãe, tudo que são pode mamãe, tudo que são pode mamãe.
On dit marcher quand elle m'a porté bas. Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, on dit marcher quand elle m'a porté bas. Tudo que são qui te bas moi, tudo que são qui te bas moi, tudo que são qui te bas moi.
Anti quoi voler moi qui te bas.
Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, anti quoi voler moi qui te bas.
Tudo que são achte mamãe, tudo que são achte mamãe, tudo que são achte mamãe.
Anti stepping was moi acheté bas. Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, anti stepping was moi acheté bas. Tudo que são qui te bas moi, tudo que são qui te bas moi, tudo que são qui te bas moi.
Patate chauffé moi qui te bas.
Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, patate chauffé moi qui te bas. Tudo que monte qui chauffe bas, tudo que monte qui chauffe bas, tudo que monte qui chauffe bas.
Tudo mais cedo que são que chauffé moi.
Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, anti c'est qui sonne qui chauffe bas. Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui chauffe bas, qui chauffe bas, c'est toujours qui monte qui chauffe bas. Il dit femme qui dou, femme qui dou, anti c'est qui sonne qui chauffe bas. Il dit femme qui dou.
Depuis nous tout petit, moi connais tout décadré encore. Attends-moi pour moi, puis la mode, si tu vas pas moi pour tout. Depuis nous tout petit, moi connais tout décadré encore. Attends-moi pour moi, puis la mode, si tu vas pas moi pour tout. C'est nous tout à moi. C'est pas ça, moi, c'est. Depuis nous tout petit, moi connais tout décadré encore. Attends-moi pour moi, puis la mode, si tu vas pas moi pour tout. Depuis nous tout petit, moi connais tout décadré encore. C'est pas ça, moi, c'est. Mais nous, c'est pas ça, moi, c'est. C'est tout là, moi, c'est. Mais nous,
Doing this no more. Love's meant to be shared. My intuition.
Good night, everyone. Good night, good night. And welcome to this evening's lecture. Before we officially commence, I would like to invite Monsignor Patrick Anthony to open this evening's session with a word of prayer.
Good evening, friends. On this occasion, as we remember Pat, we should also remember Hazel, who was Pat's buddy. So shall we begin with a moment of silence for Dr. Hazel Simmons? Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. May their souls and the souls of all the faithful departed, mercy of God, rest in peace. Let us pray. Almighty Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for bringing us here together to remember our sister, Pat, and the contribution she has made to national development. We thank you for, Lord God, for Open Campus and all those associated with this project, especially the foundation, the Memorial Foundation. We ask, Lord God, to open our minds and our hearts that as Raisa shares with us, we may grow in understanding and appreciation of the challenges ahead. Bless us, Lord, and bless our endeavor tonight. Par bon Dieu, nous remercions, nous honorons, nous glorifions pour soi. Toucher chez nous, ouvert chez nous pour nous apprécier tradition nous qu'il tient, et surtout pour nous accepter mission pour nous pousser qu'il tient pousser tradition. Béni Raïse et puis tout le monde qui a participé au soir, qui a fait prière en nom de notre Seigneur Jésus-Christ, en l'union du Saint-Esprit, ainsi soit-il. Au nom du Père et du Fils et du Saint-Esprit, ainsi soit-il.
You may have your seats. Thank you for blessing us this evening, Monsignor Patrick Anthony. My name is Sigurthani Bryan, the Outreach and Marketing Officer at UWI Global Campus St. Lucia. I'm pleased to be with you this evening and serve as your guide throughout this session. We have a very interesting session planned for you this evening. I know that you are all eager to hear from the presenter and engage in the discussion that will follow. Just to ensure that our session runs smoothly with very little disruption, please ensure that your device is on vibrate or, really low so that our speakers and contributors are not distracted during this evening's proceedings. I would like to welcome Mrs. Leslie Crane Mitchell, the head at UWI Global Campus St. Lucia, for her to offer the welcome remarks this evening.
Her Excellency, Dame Paulette Louisi, Governor General Emerita of St. Lucia, Ambassador, the Honorable Dr. June Suma, Ambassador Nicole Su, and Third Secretary Yi Wen-chu of the Embassy of the Republic of China, Taiwan, Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, the family of the late Patricia Charles, Mr. Gordon Charles, Mrs. Linda Auger, and Dr. Adrian Auger, who are here with us this evening, and of course, other family members who may be listening in online. Ms. Raisa Joseph, former director, executive director of the Folk Research Center, and currently history lecturer of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, and of course, our esteemed lecturer for this evening. Dr. Marjorie Jameson Charles, principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, chair of the Folk Research Center, Mr. Embert Charles, faculty and staff of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, adjunct lecturers and staff of the UWI Global Campus St. Lucia, UWI colleagues joining us from across the region, friends. A warm welcome to all of you joining us this evening, whether here at our UWI St. Lucia site or virtually from across the region and beyond. This evening, we gather as a community to celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Patricia Ellen Charles, who served with distinction as the 4th UWI resident tutor in St. Lucia from 1963 until her retirement in 1977. This evening's lecture marks the 11th in a series that started in 2010 with Dr. Hollis Leicester Liverpool's riveting discourse on crime and calypso. And of course, we all know him as the mighty chalk dust. Over the years, we have been fortunate to have hosted many eminent speakers, including Her Excellency Governor General Emerita Dame Paulette Louise and Dr. Adrian Auger, who are with us this evening. Ms. Raisa Joseph joins this esteemed list this evening, and we look forward with much anticipation to her presentation on memory, culture, tourism, and development, evaluating nationhood in St. Lucia. However, before we move on with the proceedings, I ask that we first pause to acknowledge 3 UWI stalwarts that we have lost this year. The first was Miss Muriel Gill, former teacher, principal, and deputy chief education officer, who passed away and was buried on April 23rd, 2025. Ms. Gill served briefly as resident tutor at the St. Lucia site in 1982. Mr. Dennis Springer, who passed away on May 25th, 2025. Mr. Springer was a well-known writer, political commentator, and talk show host, and served faithfully as an adjunct lecturer at our site for over 2 decades. He was also the beloved husband of our long-serving program officer, Mrs. Eulampia Polius Springer. And just this past Sunday, the 8th of June, we received the sad news of the sudden passing of Professor Hazel Simmons MacDonald, former Pro-Vice Chancellor and first principal of the University of the West Indies Open Campus. Like Mrs. Charles, she too was a dedicated sister and committed servant who worked assiduously to improve opportunities for and the quality of education in St. Lucia and beyond. She also served briefly as acting resident tutor in her native St. Lucia and in senior leadership positions at our Cave Hill campus, until we were finally blessed with her taking on the mammoth task of merging the former tertiary level institutions unit, the UWI Distant Education Center, and the UWI Schools of Continuing Education into one open, now global campus under the governance structure of the UWI. We extend our deepest condolences to the families and ask everyone to please observe a minute's silence as a mark of respect. I know that we have already done so for a professor, but I would also like us to do so for Mr. Springer and for Mrs. Gill. So if you would please indulge us, just stand. Thank you, everyone. May their souls rest in eternal peace. Yet, even in our grief, we are grateful. Grateful for their dedicated service to the UWI in general, but in particular to students in the non-campus countries of the Eastern Caribbean. Long before there was the global campus powered by digital technology, Mrs. Patricia Charles understood the assignment. She understood only too well the need to help the UWI unlock the potential of the peoples of the Caribbean so that they could contribute to the social, political, economic, and cultural development of a dispersed region, born into colonialism, incubated in slavery, and raised in inherited institutions and educational systems geared more towards failure than success. Mrs. Charles understood the need to break down the barriers which created a chasm between those who could afford full-time study at the UWI and those who could not, between those who lived in or near landed campuses and those in the hinterland of the non-campus territories. These were the people that Mrs. Charles dedicated her life to serving. Along with her fellow resident tutors, she fought to bridge this gap to ensure that residents in the Eastern Caribbean could find a place in the UWI's mission to unlock the potential of the region's populace. Thanks to Mrs. Charles and her colleagues, the challenge examination scheme became that bridge, spanning the distance between the Mona campus and the countries of the Eastern Caribbean. It was a bridge over which students were steered into the UWI's degree programs by a network of committed resident tutors without whom the scheme would never have been successful. Mrs. Charles was also deeply involved in development work in her adopted homeland. Her interests were many and varied. In addition to her role as resident tutor, she was actively involved in the creative and performing arts, heritage tourism, the Regional Council for Adult Education, and was instrumental in founding the island's National Research and Development Foundation. Long after she had formally retired from the UWI, Mrs. Charles continued to serve our campus as a member of the Open Campus Council from 2002 to 2009, and as the chair of the UWI Open Campus the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Advisory Committee. She continued to work for the Open Campus up to the day she became ill. Her last experience with the Open Campus in her official capacity was her attendance at the October 16, 2009 induction ceremony for Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Open Campus, Professor Hazel Simmons MacDonald, who has now also gone to her rest. As noted during the launch of the Patricia Charles Endowment for the Arts, established in her memory, a foundation that I encourage everyone to support, hers was an enduring spirit of one who was concerned enough to cast her energy into causes which would improve the human condition in profound and sustainable ways. Her task here is done. Our task is to do our bit, each within our own sphere of influence, to ensure that her legacy lives on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, Mrs. Mitchell, and for the walk down memory lane in terms of the history of the lecture as well as details on Patricia Isman, and of course for covering information on, sorry, it sounds really loud, on the deceased Mrs. Muriel Gill, Professor Emerita Hazel Simmons MacDonald, and of course, Mr. Dennis Springer. We now move on to some details on Our Lady in Yellow this evening. Our presenter, Ms. Raisa Joseph. I will read her biography so that you could get to know her a little bit more intimately before she presents. Ms. Joseph is a dynamic political analyst and development strategist with over 12 years of experience in governance, community development, and socio-cultural research. With expertise spanning across organizational management, communication, and public policy, she has made notable contributions to both regional and national projects aimed at fostering sustainable development and empowering local communities. Ms. Joseph holds a Bachelor of Science in Political Science with International Relations from the UWI Cave Hill, where she graduated as valedictorian in 2017. She also holds a Master of Philosophy in Political Science with a research focus on an investigation into the political ideology of St. Lucian Khmer and its utility as a post-colonial model of governance and social, economic, and political development. Part of this work was later featured in the 2023 Palgrave Macmillan publication, Creole Cultures, Volume 1, Safeguarding Creole Intangible Cultural Heritage, in the chapter The Spirit of Khmer, the Genesis of Identity, Community, and Cooperation in St. Lucian Society. With a wealth of teaching experience, Ms. Joseph has delivered engaging and impactful courses in Caribbean politics, Caribbean history, communication studies, ethics, and professional development. She has also made a significant mark in the media industry, serving as a feature interviewer for UWI TV, where she was recognized with the inaugural UWI TV Student Ambassador Award in 2017. Her earlier work at the Government Information Services, GIS, further honed her skills in radio broadcasting, print media, and bilingual journalism, with a focus on English and Creole. A passionate advocate for youth development, Ms. Joseph regularly contributed to the Millennial Voices, which is a column in Barbados Today, and this played a key role in drafting youth policies across the Caribbean. As the founder of the consultancy From Classroom to Community, she has worked with both governmental and non-governmental organizations to drive political analysis and community-focused initiatives. Ms. Joseph's leadership extends to her national service. She has served in the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee during a 4-year stint and continues to perform national duties as a member of the JEF CGP UNDP National Steering Committee of St. Lucia. These and other roles have allowed Ms. Joseph to contribute to the creation of policies and strategies for socio-economic development on a national scale. She also previously served as the Executive Director of the Monsignor Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center, FRC, where she oversaw numerous initiatives to preserve cultural heritage and foster community growth. Currently, Ms. Joseph is a history lecturer at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College and continues to inspire and shape conscious national discourse while remaining deeply committed to community development and justice. An earful? Definitely. I know you didn't come here this evening to see me in my pretty red dress and how it makes my eyes just dazzle at you. So please help me welcome Ms. Raisa Joseph, your presenter for this evening.
I'm supposed to have this next to me. Okay. So. Bonsoir tout le monde. All right. Yo já bienvenue en anglais, na bienvenue en créole pour commencer. Gouverneur général a passé, Madame Excellence, Dame Paulette Louisi, Madame Excellence, ambassade honorable Dr. June Soumer, Madame Excellence, ambassade pour pays République de Chine, Taïwan, Nicole Su, et puis Yuen Chiu, Monseigneur Dr. Patrick Anthony, Métaffaire pour Board FRC, Place Recherche Folklore, Mr. Ember Charles, Directeur interpassé Kennedy Booth Samuel, famille, Patricia Charles, Mr. Gordon Charles, Mrs. Linda Auger and Dr. Adrian Auger, et puis les autres membres familles qui pas ici et puis aujourd'hui, mais au cas coûté à souligne, Dr. Marjorie Jameson Charles, principal pour l'école Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Les autres travailleurs, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, assistant teacher et puis travailleurs UWI Global St. Lucia, travailleurs Oliver Wijo Caribla, et puis jeunes qui avaient nous, bienvenue. Bienvenue. All right. Oui. Je voulais faire assurer que tout le monde là pour moi soir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Qui ça m'a dit et puis puchi? What will I say and why? In preparation for today, there were a myriad of things that consumed my mind. I reflected on the changes in attitudes towards learning, family, community, and responsibility, artificial intelligence, and how we interface with technology for education, work, leisure, and communication, the social decay that makes it possible for littering to be accepted as functional and good, for the murder of any citizen, especially a young black man, to be okay, and the cyclical nature of violence, the use of violence to resolve violence, and its roots to colonial trauma and systems. There were also contemplations on what society we aim to create, the beauty of the St. Lucian community, from being greeted on a bus, receiving food from a neighbor, a prayer from a friend of the community. I also had flashbacks on the historic win of St. Lucia's first Carifta relay medalists, how they huddled together chanting jubilantly the iconic words of St. Lucia's first Olympic medalist, Julian Alfred, Lucia pressure, Lucia pressure. And I considered that economic development can be squandered if people have no appreciation for who they are, the history that informs their present, and the sacrifices and the generations that made them before them. Essentially, I was centering myself on being here, fully prepared to give purpose to this memorial lecture as an invaluable contribution to pay homage to the late Patricia Charles, while underscoring the societal needs and giving voice and direction to where we may possibly go from here. Consequently, the topic, memory, culture, tourism and development, evaluating nationhood in St. Lucia, emerged. Later, as I progressed in putting this piece together, Basil, the Creole colloquial reference for death in St. Lucia, would sweep across our social, cultural, and artistic landscape, taking with it many luminaries whose lives and work matter so much to this very topic. Among them, Pascal Watson-Louis, Lenny Stone, Nicole David, Vincent Joseph Udovic, and the late Professor Emerita, Dr. Hazel Simmons MacDonald. Memory. Qui sa ou ka changer? Ek mwen vle ou koute. Growing up, I often heard these songs as I awoke. My mother was in the kitchen preparing for the day, her radio on. The announcer was the Creole-speaking Juba, who provided daily and colorful social commentary as well as death announcements. The radio was and still remains a fundamental part of the lives of many St. Lucians. It is a way in which we remain connected to what has happened and what was. It is one of the channels that has facilitated societal learning and sharing, and sometimes indoctrination. It's also a part of hearing and understanding the St. Lucian landscape, the voice it speaks, the language that flavors it, the sacred and seminal place of death, and the developmental role of memory in English and Creole. The channels through which messages and memories are transferred to us have evolved since that time. And apart from the people who make memories memorable or unforgettable, is the fact that we often remember what is stated repeatedly. It is for this reason many of us know that he ain't worth the salt on your glass, and that at the launch of the International Jazz and Arts Festival, country and western held center stage with soca and reggae. What is memory? And there are a few pieces that I wish to share with you. Memory is not merely an individual cognitive process, but a collective phenomenon shared or shaped by social, political, and cultural contexts. That's according to Jeffrey K. Olick. Cultural memory comprises that body of reusable texts, images, and rituals specific to each society in each epoch, whose cultivation serves to stabilize and convey that society's self-image. And while memory exists, we also have responsibility. Each generation faces the task of interpreting and reinterpreting the past. Memory possesses an indispensable value. For an individual, memory creates the inner and outer worlds. It shapes thoughts, feelings, actions, war and peace, the contributions of citizens, and the very idea of a nation. Memory is what assists in making meaning of our existence. I did not know Mrs. Patricia Charles, affectionately known to some as Auntie Pat. In my endeavor to research her work and life, while there were some leads that captured glimmers of light and snippets of her life, tracing the contours of her memory and work was a bit challenging. Elements of her story, nevertheless, are a trail that forces us to ask questions about ourselves, our institutions, their work and viability, and our national plans. Moreover, some may question the value of a memorial lecture. Nous tout savons nous kay mo. Nous pas kay rester ici pour la vie di what. Yet, while we all must die, there are aspects of our lives that have indelible impacts and beckon others to continue the journey and work in the vineyard of community development. A memorial lecture consequently underscores sublime contributions an individual has made, and it is a litmus test in some respects of how alive we are to living our collective stewardship. For us, this initiative is of even greater significance because we have suffered from not only the absence of memory, fragmented memories, undocumented memories, pillaged and transformed memories, but also memories that we bury and do not want to confront. People cannot live without memory, for it is the compass of life. It is no wonder that if people have no memory to pull from, they are rudderless, lost, and seek to find meaning in a world of both mess and mystery. Even in matters of faith, for those of us who are of the Christian faith, particularly Catholics, we are told at the summit of the Mass to do this in memory of me. Much of our spiritual lives rely on a memory of faith, of others, or of our own. For the nation which does not safeguard memory, it becomes susceptible to being rebuilt in the image and likeness of someone else or something else, which does not care about its people, their beauty, stories, or worth. And so when children are not inheritors of their full stories that hold the duality of their captivity and resistance, and their identity as civilization before conquest, they become the world's pawns. They will walk within their communities among global juggernauts and be clueless. They'll sit ungratefully within classrooms that their grandparents could only dream of, and scoff at their own national development while romanticizing the TV and social media images of a West that does not exist. For nations which are emerging from the systematic experience of colonialism, newly independent as we ourselves are in the context of nationhood, the task of safeguarding memory is doubly important. For we must be engaged in the work of shedding the memory dictated by others, reclaiming the memory that was stolen, and creating from these contradictory experiences a harmonious life, our Creole experience. It is not an accident that we believe the only language that is a veritable language is English. Creole speakers have been historically classed as uneducated, rural, and backward, and many technocrats and public servants harbor this inherited prejudiced view. National Day remains the day that European colonizers discovered an inhabited island. We romanticized colonial wars on our shores that decimated indigenous populations as badges of honor and marketing tools that some still equate as well to this day the measure of leadership and governance and capacity by skin color and race is also an issue of fragmented memory. The value of memory, therefore, is not mainly to store information, it is to consciously process it for advancement, future reference, and planning. We cannot, however, garner any value from memory if it is not safeguarded or seen as valuable. We must never forget that colonized peoples were targeted in multiplex ways. The destruction of the memory of those who were captured and enslaved is a legacy that we live with. It was systemic and brutal. One area that is of particular importance is how the indigenous language was targeted. It was the late Ngugi wa Thiong'o who stated, "To starve a people of their language is to kill their memory." There is a great deal of societal wisdom that has been lost through the loss of generations of Creole speakers on the environment, medicine, folklore, music, and St. Lucian history. In an 1897 commission report on St. Lucia, the following was written about the Creole language: "No more Creole. It must take a very long time to carry any such reform into complete effect, but the matter should be steadily borne in mind and the educational system so devised as to facilitate change. Though we sing, pray, give picong, tell tales, sell, love, hate, campaign, and speak English in Creole, we remain a society devoid of full Creole literacy and its associated advantages. And though I acknowledge the current strides made to introduce Creole into schools commencing as a pilot, I must be frank in saying that we require more than just embers, but an inferno to push not merely Creole literacy, but also Creole consciousness and inclusion. It was the late Professor Hazel Simmons MacDonald who stated, "We have done a disservice to St. Lucian children who were exclusively Creole speakers, but taught throughout their school life in only English. A lot of damage has been done." In a chapter titled Vernacular Instruction and Biliteracy Development in French Creole Speakers, Simmons MacDonald did a pilot which followed a small group of exclusive Creole speakers who did not perform well in school, not because they were not intelligent, but because the education system was not created for them. How do we safeguard our memory? We must be intentional, strategic, and proactive. For memory to be safeguarded, it must be done as a matter of urgency, because time has never been on our side, and the calculations to dismantle our people have been incessant, clear, and compounded. We are required to evaluate the stories that have been told and those that have not been. Pat's professional career chronicles a life deeply enmeshed in the spheres of education, culture, preservation, art and creativity, and people. These areas of work are typically vocations of thankless service, where attempts are made to make space for society to bloom. What is extraordinary is that she held seminal positions in several local and national institutions of memory. Among them were the Archaeological and Historical Society, in which she served as its president, the National Research and Development Foundation, NRDF, which was formerly the Caribbean Research Center. She served as its director, the Cultural Development Foundation. She was its first chairperson, the St. Lucia National Trust. She served as an executive director, the Folk Research Center. She was a board member. Do we know the status of these institutions or their viability? Moreover, if we were trying to find out more about ourselves, where would we look? And would we even know where to begin? What is the status of our libraries? What of the Hunter J. Foswell Library located a few minutes walk from here? Or the National Archives Authority of St. Lucia and its work? What of Radio St. Lucia and its records? Do these truly matter to us, or has information sharing and memory preservation been reduced to asking ChatGPT or Grok? It is of great import who and what tools are helping us to remember, and for what purpose. Another concern or danger is the reduction of thought and internal reference and processing. It is the collective responsibility of the government, private sector, civil society, and citizens to mind our memory. This is our business. Official memory, inherited and created of St. Lucia, has generally framed the identity of the state and people so tightly in categories like colony and destination, or enslaved and worker. The other experiences, causes, and roles that interplay in the St. Lucian Buyo are sidelined. They re-emerge at times as decorations, which hang yearly during observances and festivities. Or they feature as taglines and footnotes for momentous global platform speeches, or as our participation in international waves of consciousness tied to Black Lives Matter or reparatory justice. They do not formatively constitute national plans, educational visions, or formative discussions on citizenship. On an individual level, memory holds a functional purpose to navigate daily life, to review and to engage in conscious reflection, whether it is brushing our teeth or driving our cars on a morning, to applying business decisions at work, or the words that we say to our children before and after school. We need memory to survive. Why should we reflect? Because when we do not reflect, we forget important lessons, and others can create new lives for us. We create areas of vulnerability. We can forget or undervalue the worth or cost of a thing and render it useless. We can ignore red flags before imminent destruction. The pit of an unreflective nation manifests itself in heroes and heroines who die like the homeless. The election and re-election of populist, unrepentant, and megalomaniac leaders. The erosion of tangible and intangible heritage, and the ever so common lamentations of, what have we become? Boje, mete alame, epi. The landscape of St. Lucian memory is vast and deep. It is in varied shades of flora and fauna, black and white sea sand, the songs of chanteurs and chanteuses, historic buildings which become sawdust and mold as we develop, La Jablesse, Tibolom, and Jogage, brigand wars and Kalinago resistance that would thwart the monopoly of the British and the French. In remembering, we can have more veritable measures of progress that are not qualified by partisan metrics or external donor and international agencies, which do not appreciate context or the character of a nation as a community. We are also capable of seeing injustice and structural inequality. The St. Lucian franchise is one such example. Following lobbying efforts, the first time that the franchise opened up to the local man was on March 9th, 1925. The qualifying markers were that one needed to be a man, be literate, and have a certain economic standing or land. Many of us in this room would not qualify by these standards. Today, the right to vote, which was previously a privilege, is not regarded as much neither the cost and consequences of it. Though the privilege of franchise has evolved to a right, these issues which inhibited it to the vast majority persist 100 years later: gendered and wage inequality and attempts to denigrate the poor. Memory, society, and development are intertwined. Their relationship can be tied to building street and community names and extend to institutions of national development like banks, protective services, parliament, and the education sector. Memory is what we live. And so, when we think of culture, est-ce que ça nous voyons? The most common definition of culture is that it is the way of life of a people. Somehow, as profound as that may be, it can become so simplified that we miss its importance. We can reduce culture to the tangible like food and drink and think nothing more of it. It would be impossible for me to delineate in one lecture the scope of St. Lucian culture. My exploration of culture endeavors to examine 1. St. Lucia's political culture, tradition of cooperative work, self-reliance, and independent growth, and 2. The secondary treatment of culture as a garnish instead of a cornerstone of sustainable development and national planning. The way of life of a people informs their existence, their vision, and philosophy. It instructs how they solve problems, their distinctiveness in the world, what and how they create. I do not think many of us have ever truly contemplated that there is a St. Lucian philosophy or ethos, but there is. While we are a part of the global phenomenon that created the West Indies, what we now know as the Caribbean, there is a peculiarity to the St. Lucian culture, in particular the creations of the St. Lucian folk and communities through their work and life. For a distinct historical movement of cooperative living, working and living collaboratively as community people, many of our independent developments were made. Their developmental efforts through collectivism trumped the notion that individualism and money were the only path to development. As an undergraduate student at the University of the West Indies Cable Campus, pursuing then a degree in political science of international relations, I was preoccupied with evaluations of our politics, history, and associated challenges. I reflected on what solutions existed to surmount our issues that came from the people. What I discovered was far greater. In an investigation of our way of life, how we sought to build communities and support each other, I learned more about our political culture. Though the academic literature and social commentary tended to be skewed towards Caribbean states being too small and having inadequate resources, the lived realities portended that despite size and scarcity, political culture can make a considerable difference. In the St. Lucian context, for the philosophy of Kudme, I discovered a significant foundation of the modern-day St. Lucia and the resilience of its communities. What is Kudme? To the average individual, Kudme is a tradition done long ago, a bagay nou te ka fet a talotan, a method utilized for home building and other activities. Deeper research revealed that it is both a philosophy and a practice. Kudme is a cooperative self-help practiced in St. Lucia. It consists of a group of cooperative workers who give voluntary help to members of their communities and sometimes neighboring communities upon their request. It is also tied to a particular value system, understanding of relationship and community. Work builds character. Work builds relationships. Work builds community. No one is ever paid, nor does anyone even expect to be paid in hard cash at the end of a Kudme, although each organizer should always be ready to give payment in kind, that is, to join a Kudme whenever he is especially asked to be a next organizer, by a next organizer. So, where does Kudme come from? One of the earliest known documented accounts in St. Lucia emerges from John Quinlan, a St. Lucian surveyor who advocated on sugar-related matters in the UK and was also the editor of a journal called The Telephone. He noted the following in 1897. The peasants of St. Lucia are the only set of planters to whom it would be safe to make loans. They can work with their own hands, and small plots of land they offer as security are unencumbered. They are united. One willingly helps the other. They work for each other under a system called kudame, or help for which no money is paid. There are links to African value systems. It is an African heritage grounded in a community ethos, collective responsibility, and cooperativism. Through linguistic and anthropological evidence, it is connected to the Senegambian region and its people. For instance, the Igbo social political setting has been described as stateless, segmented, egalitarian. The Igbo society have also been known to angle toward the principles of solidarity and to be communally oriented. Its socio-political structure is equally organized as such. It is illustrative of democracy at a local level. Expanding further on African philosophy, Leopold Sedar Senghor opined that Negro African society puts more stress on the group than on the individuals, more on solidarity than on the activity and needs of the individual, more on the communion of persons than on their autonomy. Ours is a community society. One African formation that bears uncanny similarities to St. Lucian Kudme originates from the former kingdom of the Dahomey. According to Huskowitz, he states, the Dahomeyan love of organization is perhaps the best exemplified in the numerous associations for mutual self-help which characterize all phases of life. These include such diverse types of societies as those for cooperative farming, for the production of tools and weapons, for subsidizing the cost of funerals, marriages, and other ceremonies which exact large expenditures from the individual. The basic and most widely spread of these cooperative groups is known as the dog pui. And I'm sure when you listen to that, you could see Kudme being practiced right there, but replacing Kudme with dog pui. What has been its impact? Beyond discerning key aspects of our identity, it is significant that our way of life has benefited our social, economic, and political development. I wish to reference some notable examples. Economically, many indigenous financial institutions are the product of Kudme. They offered financial autonomy and opportunities for individual, community, and national development, as well as investment. Among them are the Labri Cooperative Credit Union. The institution itself underscores this contribution, outlining that community consultations and the recognition that the community needed to mobilize its financial and human resources on a self-help basis for the development and improvement of the quality of life of the people of Labri. For the First National Bank, formerly the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank Limited, a similar genesis is expressed in its historical documentation. The chief component of this process has been the spirit of cooperation and mutual trust, which inspired the founders and was handed on as established tradition to their successors on the board of directors. Socially and politically, we too have seen the impact of Kudme in a number of ways. Kudme has prescribed standards of living and building within communities, fostering unity and social development. An article in the Voice newspaper titled, "The People of Saltibus," published on January 31st, 1970, cited the spirit of cooperation as a significant part of community development. It referenced the participation of a blind man who assisted in carrying stones in the community construction, and this was integral. The Premier of St. Lucia, Sir John Compton, attributed the spirit of the opening of the Deriso Parish Hall in his constituency of Mikud South. Compton stated, "Nothing is done except the people are behind it, and the people of Deriso had demonstrated the true spirit of community life over the years." There are similar documented occurrences in communities like Monrepo-Miku, connected to cooperative work on churches, and in the provision of essential public services like water. There are also self-help type practices like society that remain for death and burial, which are an indigenous form of self-help. In 2018, I interviewed Tyrone Isidore, was one of two individuals responsible for society in Grace VA4. Isidore spoke to me about its value. He stated, "I believe that it is a very important thing. After all, you know, I grew up in my community. I have observed my grandfather and how he was willing to help out individuals. And then, when they approached me and asked me whether I was willing to volunteer myself, I looked at it as a way of helping out in the community. I believe that it really started with people joining together in order to help our community. I grew up with my grandfather and I have been observing the way of life. And you know, I realize it's very crucial for us in the community to volunteer yourself to helping our people in that situation." It was Nobel laureate Derek Walcott who spoke about Kudme not merely as a form of work, but as a spirit. But once we lose the tribal duty of help, the Kudme, we lose spirit, then a country. As we have lost the flight of pelicans, more than ecological disaster can happen to human nature, it can lose ritual and custom. When charity declines into nostalgia, we are all reduced. It is undeniable that culture will evolve and that social change confronts us, especially with accelerated forms of technology, more aggressive and covert policies of foreign nations, and internal failures on our part to tell, solidify, and proliferate the St. ethic among our people. Nevertheless, it is crucial to remember that there is a St. way of life that draws from a legacy where our people have worked together successfully for generations. This is significant because we must remember that there are options to the ones that present themselves to us today. The cynicism that we have fallen into about ourselves, what is possible, and how we should behave and live is not automatic. They are life choices that are reaffirmed in our spirituality or lack thereof, our exchange of political autonomy and partnership for dependence and monetary exchange, and the belief and reaffirmation that the individual is greater than the community. Politics is cultural and changes culture too. I must also add that just like memory remains a space of contention between colonial and the independent, our political culture is no different. It was the late Patrick Emmanuel who spoke about culture and its impact on politics. Cultural values shape the ways in which the institutional complex of government and politics are interpreted and responded to. Nationally, the role of St. Lucian culture in and for development as it relates to policy, budgetary priority, ministerial configurations, and corporate support has been wanting. There have been intermittent waves of disinterest, concern, and reversals. Though in recent times we have seen greater efforts made through initiatives and investments in emancipation, as well as ongoing draft work on a cultural heritage management policy, still a broader, more cohesive vision for St. Lucian culture eludes us, and its absence is visible in how we structure and plan for development and what we define success as. The journey of culture as part of our public service tells this tale. There was a transition from a cultural desk to a standalone ministry towards the end of the 20th century. Culture thereafter has been a foster child, strung along under parent ministries with omnibus alignments and little, if any, specialized human resources to push its development. Culture is necessary as it influences values, norms, and beliefs and shapes policy implementation. We have quantitative benchmarks, for instance, within the education sector of academic achievement. We desire for our students a particular number of CXCs or alignment of subject selections for what the labor market demands. There is not a question of the kind of citizen that a student should be after leaving school, the values they should have, or the basic knowledge they should possess about their identity as St. Lucians. Additionally, though it is culture that accounts largely for the strategic advantages of St. Lucia through its hospitality, cuisine, music traditions, festivities, and dynamic creatives, culture must often justify its place and the resources it receives by proving its financial profitability. Some of our prevailing views are economically deterministic. Si pa ka fe l'argent, i pa nil balè. Essentially, this has given rise to the dollarization and eventification of culture. Culture, despite its vastness, is reduced to a commodity. Like education, we treat culture like an event. We desire that culture entertains us, stimulates all our needs, feeds our belly, gives us hype, good vibes, bonte. La panière qui pli du pesa. In so doing, unique opportunities are missed for preserving what is endemic, facilitating continuity and legitimate avenues for human development and inbuilt social safety nets. We are eliminating space for learning and confining expression, just like we do our laughs to lols. We miss critical opportunities for culture to reform and transform our developmental plans. Even in the creative and tourism sectors, we are generally preoccupied with the use of cultural assets to the neglect of their regeneration. If St. Lucia were a sound, what would it sound like? Sesen, solo or taboo, or folk band, a Denry segment beat? If St. Lucia were a movement, what would it be? A masquerade, a mulala, or kutumba? Who preserves these sounds and steps and develops St. Lucian artistry? World powers understand and optimize their cultural history. It is part of fomenting internal strength, character, and necessary in projecting their image and autonomy to the outside world. Consequently, it is wise not only to build a robust economy, but also a society that is equally strong, where there is a shared vision and understanding of economic rewards and collective responsibility. St. Lucia's flower festivals offer rich insight into St. Lucian culture, tradition, intangible heritage, and resistance. They have transcended multiple worlds and generations. Common knowledge and our own participation are limited to the climax of these respective celebrations. Pola Wars on the 30th of August and La Marguerite the 17th of October. Research suggests that these are pre-emancipation survivals. Centuries later, while we hear songs sung, some older, others newly created, we still have not ventured to take time to research the meaning behind the songs that are sung, the continuity of these societies and communities, and the purpose it brings to the young and young at heart who are its patrons. We live in a society where we are at varying levels of knowing ourselves. Tourism. And I wanted to share a quote by Anthony Bogues that speaks to not just the St. Lucian Society, but our Caribbean societies and why they were created. Our societies, built upon slavery and forms of servitude, operated on the principles of exclusion, on the perpetual domination of an elite, and upon the idea that those excluded would never be able to enter the domain of the civilized. Most of us, if not all of us, might have heard of clickbait, right? Clickbait on the internet, you know, they try and trick you. I cannot lie. The use of tourism was lecture bait. Though I do intend to speak on the area, it may not be in the way that is expected or framed in the perspective of tourism being good or bad. Tourism is our present chapter in what truly is a much needed discourse on the status of labor, the worker, and its legacy in St. Lucia. A generation before us and this discussion could easily have been on the banana industry. A generation from now, it may be on the business processing outsourcing industry, what we commonly refer to as call centers. We have been for most of our existence preoccupied with work as survival, often under questionable circumstances. When we examine an industry and its impact, it is useful to adopt history as a tool for measuring what has changed or remained the same, and its impact on economic, political, and social life. In the memoir of George Frederick Lawrence Charles, a distinguished leader in the labor movement and founding father, whose role in the independent development of St. Lucia has been underwhelmingly told, we gain insights on labor conditions and society. In the history of St. Lucia labor movement from 1945 to 1974, George F. L. Charles and personal memoir, we look at the working conditions in St. Lucia. Employers in St. Lucia, like other islands of the Caribbean, inherited their behavior to labor from the slave trade, which consisted mostly of Africans or persons of African descent. While later on, the Indians were recruited as indentured laborers to replace recalcitrant Africans, their conditions of employment were not much different in humiliation and social discrimination from the freed Africans. The object of employment during this early period was to amass quick fortunes for European owners who employed privileged natives or expatriates to administer their estates, and with more special emphasis on the production of sugar. Although West Indian products fetched very high prices on the world's market before the economic depression of the 30s, wages had been pegged at 1 shilling per day for men and 10.5 pence for women for a 12-hour day, including Sundays. Workers had no rights to overtime, and their children from the age of 8 years were forced into the fields at reduced wages or just to help their parents in completing early a day's task, which did not yield very much more than a minimum wage of 1 shilling per day for the male partner of the family. Even native businessmen in the field of commerce or agriculture considered the expatriate pattern appropriate to paid wages, either in relationship to that or less in some instances. For instance, a shop assistant employed in a dry goods store or grocery shop on 12-hour per day basis received a monthly salary ranging from 10 pence to £1, depending on experience. The assessment of what might have been considered as better wages to clerical employees, both in the civil service and commerce, did not vary much from this law. As it is not possible to pay more than you receive as salary or wages, domestic servants employed in private homes working from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Based on this, I wanted us to ask ourselves some questions about our labor conditions and whether we have experienced any significant change. Some have changed, but some have also persisted. What are the attitudes of employers, local and foreign, towards St. Lucian labor? What are the objectives of the tourism sector from the perspective of those who own hotel plans? Is it also to amass quick fortune? Some St. Lucian hotels are considered the most expensive in the world. Is the remuneration of the worker commensurate to that cost? Does the St. Lucian in an independent St. Lucia experience a relationship with land and power that allows him or her the opportunity to be steward instead of slave or servant? More than survival and living, what does our work cost us? It is undeniable that tourism drives the gross domestic product of St. Lucia and is a major source of job creation. The St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association estimated that in 2021, tourism accounted for 65% of St. Lucia's gross domestic product. The tourism structure or plant requires little capital input from government, but exacts a higher premium of our nation's best: beaches, land, and human resources. The hours are long and usually irregular, with shifts ranging in some instances from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. There is also a social tax that we have not spent adequate time exploring and calculating. Its social cost has been a re-engineered family structure and life. We have discussed barrel children, but what of hotel children? Their parents leave for work before they awake, and many return to sleeping children. We have stressed that it takes a community, but a community without a functional family structure where child rearing, healthy working conditions, and equitable pay exist is a recipe for social decay and increased vulnerability. Furthermore, much of our independent dialogue has not transcended the needs of our people, beyond the construct of being seen as only labor or workers. It is opportune for citizenship to take center stage, where we are more heavily invested in holistic education, not just certification for the demands of the labor market. Education is required to shape the market, stimulate adaptation and sustainability, and more inclusive growth. Such reframing is vital so that we can see and accept ourselves beyond the labels and values that have been placed on us. Similarly, an ecological conscience is required for an industry that consumes the very environmental beauty it relies on to lure its visitors and remain attractive. Among the powerful P's of politics, property, and power, let us remember our patrimony. The rumblings which emerged in 2020 tied to the Gopito saga remain real concerns in our economic exploits, whether it is in Choiseul or Montpima. I wish to reshare what I wrote in a piece entitled Building a Destination, Breaking a Nation, the Gopito saga. What is the value of one's identity? For Caribbean nations, our identities matter in determining the quality of life of our people. They are impacted by historical legacies of control and exploitation, and are defined by political decisions and vision plans. As independent states, the region is at a critical juncture, a coming of age in which an acute awareness is necessary in determining the intentional actions that are taken and the consequences that will arise. Yet there is a great dilemma that has plagued Caribbean development: the inability to reconcile the differences between building a destination, a product marketed for the enjoyment of the visitor, and the building of a nation. The latter is rooted in the welfare of citizens, their culture, and development that does not sacrifice sustainability and tokenize things that are invaluable. The Gopito saga, that is, the controversy surrounding the construction on one of the two most iconic peaks in St. Lucia and the world, the Pitons, is emblematic of the political and developmental crisis of the Caribbean. Public discourse on the matter has been backed by outrage, married with nonchalance and a business-as-usual approach. The issue involves the potential environmental degradation of a World Heritage Site, the need for more comprehensive and equitable legislation in the management and preservation of national heritage, a culture of heritage conservation, civil society activism, the integrity of governance authorities, and the abusive powers of Westminster executives. Moreover, what has been a rising concern in the practice of making disposable and cheap national and invaluable public goods, particularly those of historical or environmental value. The Gopito saga is not the tip of the iceberg. It is the mountain of national shame that has been built on similar occurrences like Le Paradis, DSH, and the Cabot's Link developments. In the name of development, which has become a euphemism for destruction without conscience or thought for the future, the inexcusable becomes an acceptable standard. And so it is said that in the name of development, land must be sold and construction must take place. People must eat, but for how long and at what cost? Can the nation afford development like this? We must work and we must eat, yet we cannot live via tourism's bread alone. When we think of nationhood, Lloyd Best says it best. Social change in the Caribbean has to and can only begin in the minds of Caribbean men. If we are to act for change, our philosophers and our theorists have first to understand how we relate to ourselves and to the wider world in which we live. And so, when we assess the connection and import of memory, culture, and work, they have an indelible impact on the shared identity and sovereignty of our nation. Nationhood is not a destination or a sprint that culminated on February 22nd, 1979. It is an ongoing process that must constantly be reviewed and refined by citizens. Through consistent engagement of our collective memory, cultural practice, and its effects on social and political life, and contesting the legacies of economic paths of development created for others and not for ourselves, we assert independence and identity. Consequently, It demands that our budgets, planning, thinking, governance, and opposition adopt broader frameworks from which we build, so that we aren't trying to grow a nation from its branches, forgetting the importance of roots and grounding. Writing as the chairperson of the Cultural Development Foundation, Patricia Charles wrote, "All too often we hear or read from a young and sometimes not so young journalist that, for the very first time in St. Lucia, when we know that it is not the first, but the 5th or the 15th time for that matter, and we have no one to blame but ourselves for not passing on stories of our generations. This lecture is as much about the past as it is the present and the future. Memory matters. Culture matters. Identity with and beyond work matters. St. Lucia matters. Moble wi mersi ou pou tan ou swea. Mwen ye espoir ki la kay ni yon pa wola sou tout sa mwen jadi kay ede ou kon yon set lisyen. Mersi apil.
Thank you very much, Ms. Raisa Joseph. You have quenched our thirst and piqued our interest this evening. I'm certain that we will have a very hearty engagement in terms of our discussion this evening. You have covered holistically your topic of memory, culture, tourism, and development, evaluating nationhood in St. Lucia with a very sincere emphasis on memory, culture, and the clickbait of tourism. You really had us there. You really had me there for certain. So I would now like to invite our president of the UWI Global Campus St. Lucia Toastmasters Club, who will serve as the moderator for this evening, and he will open the floor for questions and comments, as well as comments from our virtual audience as well. So please help me welcome Mr. Siobhan Bryan.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bryan. Thank you and good evening all. I'm sure we can attest to a very engaging, enlightening, refreshing lecture by Ms. Joseph, and it is indeed an honor to receive such information at this timely juncture where we see in many facets of society our culture is being challenged, and we need more than ever that defining moment where we can all identify as Lucians. In the lecture this evening, there were lots of quotations that I derived from your presentation, Ms. Joseph. One of them that caught my attention was in the beginning when you said, economic development can be squandered if people have no connection to who they are. And that's important. We need to know who we are. There were lots of snippets that took us down memory lane when you played Sham Salah. And I too remember as a child waking up to Jukba and hearing songs like Monsieur Maya. Yes. And there were many others, but I'm sure we can discuss that over refreshments. And we will now get into the discussion on the floor. Lots of wisdom shared tonight, and I'm sure that our participants here have much to share from your unique perspectives. I encourage you to keep your contributions concise as we navigate questions both from on the floor and our virtual audience. Let's aim for the 3-minute mark, and let's engage Ms. Joseph in a very rich discussion. My first question to you, Ms. Joseph. I know that you said the tourism was a clickbait, and I could not help but connect your idea of the Kudme to our current way of life. And my question is, are there any practices or areas that have been revived due to tourism interest? Are there any examples or practices or areas that have been revived due to tourism interest?
You mean culturally?
Culturally, physically, if there are any sites that were restored?
To my knowledge, touristic interest, the only thing that I can reference would not necessarily be tied to self-help with tourism, but rather a number of traditional folk performances are usually pulled into the tourism market, into hotels, and that forms the basis of entertainment. But to a question like that, and connected back to the presentation, is that we see a lot of these bands, but we never see the genesis of new bands coming after. So you would see, for example, Charlie's Mamalakai, but where is the follow-up for it to say that there is a new generation of musicians, whether it's at the School of Music, so that there is continuity, because that is a particular distinct sound that is St. Lucian, but there is no real thought going into the next generation of Mamalakais and bands being proliferated so that that sound is maintained for generations to come, and that there is opportunity for new creation to take place.
Thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Ms. Joseph. So now we will welcome questions on the floor, and I would like participants to raise your hand, and the mic will be directed to you. Let's go, Mr. Maffer. Can you stand?
Memory as a child growing up in Castres in the 60s. There were two words that I remember. And one word was Negmawa, which is a word from the French Panther class that we use in the derogatory sense against our fellow St. Lucians. But technically, it doesn't matter. They recognize that Negmawa was a rule or freedom fighter.
Thank you very much.
That's an excellent question, but I wanted to ask you before I responded, when did you learn that your use of Negmao was incorrect? When did you learn?
I think it's about, it just occurred to me about maybe it probably occurred to me maybe about 20 years ago that that something about the use of the term was wrong, because I'm aware about the Maroons, about later on became aware about St. Lucia's freedom fighters, and I was aware of what happened in 1796 when our Negmawa army was surrendered on Mont Fortune. So then it really occurred to me that something is wrong about using the term Negmawa. Yeah.
Well, what is always important is that you first identify that there is a problem, but you can't identify that there is a problem if you're not exposed to new information. So the fact that you now know, it means that when you encounter others who don't know, that you must share and tell. And the issue is that so much of our sharing is on an individual basis, that it's not being proliferated as widely as possible and not documented formally, that is in a manner that can be accessed. Because in the same manner that you were able to find out, there are students that I teach that don't know and use Negmawo in a negative connotation. And during this term, we had a discussion. I said, when have you used the term Negmawa? or to refer to someone who was doing foolishness. I said, do you even know what it means? And it's part of our lack of re-education and empowerment of ourselves. When we speak about who we are, if you've never heard anything positive about the Negmawo and in your local experience, it has been a term of denigration, then it will be problematic. But that, even the expression of Negmawo is tied to a whole education about the black person that is either overly sexualized or painted in a picture of being very uneducated, unrefined, and uncivilized. So we have to bring on the entire narrative and tell our story of who we are.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joseph, for your response. Yes, we have another question on the floor.
Good evening, everybody. Raisa, thank you so much for delivering such a fantastic lecture. It was really insightful and engaging. I wanted to, as I was listening to you talking about memory, and you mentioned the software applications of today, ChatGPT, et cetera, I was wondering what you thought of the shift in the hardware that we use to store our memories. You know, growing up, we had our physical photo albums. They were a family event. We put them in and we looked at them together. Now everybody has a supercomputer in their pocket and they put their pictures, and the pictures are stored on that device. Yes, it may go up onto social media, but how many of our imaginary friends are really looking at them? So I'm just wondering your thoughts on the shift in the physical devices that we use, the physical platforms that we use to store our memories, and how that affects, you know, our societal way of archiving and transmitting memories onwards.
Okay. I like that question because I've been thinking about it myself. Part of the evolution of the technology to store it is, for me, problematic because it's not being done for the purpose of real advancement, but for money-making purposes or schemes. That's one thing I wanted to note. The other thing is that while we have pictures on our phones, reference to dates or even grouping or classifying things into albums has gone out the door. So it's not even a matter of just that it's being stored in a different format. How information is being valued has changed too. So a photo that you may take, because you're taking so many, you lose the actual impact or purpose of what it's actually for. So in some ways it's actually harmed the value of memory, and also added to the distortion of memory because you just assume, well, I can just get it, it's in the cloud, but you never really go back to it or actually refer to it in a way that is constructive. So yes, it's there and it's in your phone and in a pocket-sized version, but when do you ever go back to it? You've probably taken 1,000 photos for the month of January alone. So what do you go back to and seek and say, well, this is an important memory I want to capture, and can you actually go back and use your own memory to recollect what was an important point, because you aren't writing it, you're relying on a device to do a number of the processing and relational matters that we used to do for ourselves. So it's not just changing how we store, but our ideas of how we value information has changed, so it's compounding the problem.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph again. We have another question on the floor.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Congrats on a very good lecture. Yeah, you spoke about the Kudme and various aspects of our culture. And I remember a poem by Kishma Seria where she spoke about the fact that we speak of it takes a village to raise a child. And in the poem, she sought to demonstrate how the village can also be the place where you might suit away certain kind of activity which actually is destructive. Also, we have changes in the society where you had the kind of collective kind of workings, but now people say, people come to their funeral just for food, and everybody want to mourn in private and that kind of stuff. Even with the Kudme, what I want to I'd like you to speak to is, yes, these were elements of our culture and still are, but with changing values and with different segments of the society, do you see any possible contradictions or even spaces where some elements that might actually have benefited a collective can now be used by persons, even when we talk of the technology, where persons of a different kind of ethos, etc., can actually use these to manipulate and take advantage of, the collective sensibility that people may have. Yeah.
Okay. I may reflect on that question so I can give you a proper response. Kishma's poem on different groupings actually causing harm is not a problem, because we always have to confront our institutions and ask, are they performing the task for which they were created? Kudme is our creation, and it's not just a recollection of past heritage, but it's a response to the kind of society that we lived in, because I still feel like we live in two worlds in the same society. So at the community level, we function in our own political space where we can make things happen with our own capital of, I know Theodore, or I know Ted, and I can make this happen because we have this kind of relationship. But at the formal level of our politics, that does not happen. It continues to function in the way that it would in a British colonial system, and so we have that kind of contradictory life now. With Kudme, I don't necessarily see Kudme being hijacked. However, I see, for example, in the whole Creative Alliance debacle that took place, the mischaracterization of traditional forms, which are institutions of trust, being manipulated to pull people in to schemes. So that has happened. We also have, in the international volunteer space, the kind of, how would I frame it, opportunistic use of volunteerism for professional gain and ladder climbing, where Kudme was never meant for that. It never existed for that, and was on a level of more equity and balance of support, because we really were community and we cared about one another. Not that we wanted to go to a school and do that and take photo ops to say, okay, well, I'm helping you, I'm helping this group, but I have a vested interest because I am part of the community and not just part of a volunteer group that I can put on my CV. So these are some of the threats and issues we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you. We have a question over here.
Thank you. When I heard the comments behind me, I decided not to look to see who was asking the question. The reason why is because that person must be someone who has either studied media or worked with the media. Now we'll look back to see who asked the question. Because it was a very interesting question. And it goes back to, I guess, our understanding of media theory. There's a philosopher called Marshall McLuhan who spoke about the medium is the message. And as we progress as a society, the use of technology is seen as an extension of the progress of man. Orality is so important to us in developing societies like ours. It was a time when ordinary folk in rural areas who shared information orally, we were seen as backward because there was no way of capturing and documenting the information. So the civilization of that information came about with print, with writing, and that type of documentation. What has happened now, we have gone full circle back to orality with social media, but then the major disappointment is the absence of a productive approach to using this very orality to capture memory, to store memory, and to share it. Because social media has become as cockney and rural as the time we use it when we are being accused of being uneducated and also uncivilized and unproductive. I just wanted to get your comment on her question, which I didn't think you commented on sufficiently, but also anybody who wants to comment on it, because that to me unlocks some of the many challenges that we're facing in terms of ensuring that our patrimony is properly captured in its authenticity and then shared and preserved. Because most times, there's a lot of interpretation of what we think is authentic, but we haven't captured it so at least preserve it, and then we can take it in its true authentic form to comment on it. It's a bit of a long-winded question, but it's a discussion.
And that is why I tried to be very, very simple and direct to the most salient parts of Janika's question. I wanted to add that in a number of ways, we're speaking about a world within our world, in the cyberspace, that for most of us, even in St. Lucia, if we look at what is happening now, is unregulated. So whereas there is consequence when you did something verbally to someone's face, there was an impact of speaking and interacting with that person, in the cyberspace, especially in our state, what is the consequence and what is the legislation or policy that gives people consequence for the actions that they go on? And there is none. And that is what is making it even more problematic than what existed before. Because someone can create a voice message, circulate it, and we run with it and cause irreparable damage to people's identity, all in the name of freedom of expression on social media. And I have a page, but I have a page without a conscience or responsibility. And that is a global phenomenon. I'm not sure how we are going to contest, except to say that our citizenship, as you rightfully said, identity is now extended to our phones and devices, that we now have to have responsibility tied into it, because we don't even teach our children that as well. So what you've asked me is a broader societal question. I throw back at you. How would you deal with it as someone evolving? How did you deal with the challenges tied to it? But it means saying something too when we see that someone has shared with me some information allegedly about somebody I don't know. Is it true? Is it useful? The recent phenomena going on right now, I had to ask somebody, if this is true, how has the sharing helped the person involved? If it is not true, what damage has been done? The sharing has done nothing positive for anyone, because the aim was not even to provide any form of societal change that is positive or reform for the person. It was to create shame. And the discussions that have happened after the fact have not just enveloped the individual, it's enveloped a family, and even stigmatization of an entire community. And who deals with the consequences of that?
All right, thank you, Ms. Joseph. We have 2 more questions.
Thanks, Raisa, for a beautiful lecture. I wanted to go back to your thesis, your master's thesis. And have you done any further work exploring the whole question of political economy and the impact in terms of culture, a profound cultural experience like Kudme? Because Guyana is the only country, Forbes Burnham influenced by Senghor and Nigerian Tanzanian model. Forbes Burnham declared Guyana a cooperative republic. So that was a direct political, socio-political intervention to try to use the cooperative phenomenon for societal transformation. Since Guyana has gone boom with oil, I understood that the government has given every Guyanese, how much money? Every Guyanese, just like being Guyanese, okay, that you share in that kind of the wealth. So the experiment of Guyana as a cooperative republic based on the Tanzanian model, have you explored that in any way in terms of your own continued research from your masters?
Can you hear me? Okay. My research has stayed within St. Lucia, financial institutions, organizations like the FRC, and even how communities move on the local government front. And the challenge is that while we know that it is a system and it works, it lacks a level of formal legitimacy to take root that is desired. And even with the change in our politics, where every 5 years you have a different government, a different ethos towards community, you challenge the level of community cooperation when you bring in the incentive of money as the replacement for cooperative work. And that is the continuous challenge. And you have a structure, even within local governance, that can take root in terms of creating more community development, where the structures that exist in the community where people naturally, because you want that kind of free participatory democracy, it doesn't happen because it's still a selective process of governance. So while we know Kudme exists at the informal level, that individuals are organizing and creating, doing NGO formations and groupings, there is a ceiling that it reaches, not because it doesn't have impact, but because our broader national politics does not have a definition for it, does not incorporate it or practice it, save for maybe at tokenistic periods of times during electioneering, and so there are limits. If we really had a government or political party which was so oriented, we would see a number of changes, not just in economic and community development, but in terms of social safety nets of protection, of how you re-engineer participation, because we rely heavily for the protection of our communities on police, which are supposed to be a response, or a ministry that is located in one office in a government ministry where the community itself has protected itself for a long time and created forms, whether it's in agriculture to make things work and happen, whether it is society for persons who cannot afford insurance with the various policymakers that they trust themselves enough to save amongst themselves. But apart from the community doing it, does the governmental level do it? And the answer is no. And if the government and the local level are living a contradictory life, then we cannot have a system that is really, really strong. And that's the challenge that I've encountered. It's valuable, it exists, but its limits in the formal political structure level.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Charles. Next question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raisa, for a very interesting and stimulating lecture. My contribution is centered around your thesis of memory, because I wanted you to deal with memory and trauma.
And trauma.
Well, not one trauma, but many traumas.
Would not live here tonight.
That we have faced, and I think that it would help, because unless we go through the healing from these traumas, a lot of the questions that we have been asked tonight cannot be answered sufficiently. So the question of how we see ourselves and our identity, and with relation to Negmawa, etc., cannot be answered unless we deal with the fact that we have not accepted ourselves as human beings, as viable people. And that has to do with one kind of trauma. The fact that we have not put in place the systems, or we have not sustained the systems of trust that we know that are entrenched within our society, has to do with the trauma. We have been taught not to trust each other. We have been taught not to trust our leaders. We have been taught not to trust imposed systems. At the same time, we are so traumatized by these systems that we do not want to change them, because it makes us comfortable. The trauma has put us in a comfortable position. And I think that unless we deal with healing for what we have gone through, we will continue to not realize that tourism is also a plantation. And that the future that we are building is not any different to the past that we have had. Thank you.
That was excellent. I don't have to respond to it, right? I just have to agree with it. No, but to be honest, in developing the lecture today, there were a lot of things I had to leave out. Otherwise, I'd keep you here very long, and you are working people, and I respect your time. But it is true. Even when we speak about violence and the condition of the St. Lucian man, and I don't want to speak for St. Lucian men, but the truth is, we do not deal with the fact that we have been traumatized for a long time. We pretend that it does not exist. We drink it away. We smoke it away. We use women as a crutch for it to deal with the issues that we have been dealing with, even in our families and the brokenness that we are experiencing. But many people don't even think there's a problem. We just say, this is who we are, Sekosanwe, and we leave it right there because nobody wants to confront it. And confronting it is messy. It's not always politically expedient. It doesn't get people votes. And it actually means that the current structures that exist, which are inadequate, we know that they are, it would have to change, and you would have to put more money into social services and take the work of emancipation seriously beyond the month of August to do that kind of discussion and deeper engagement with people on a level we have not done before.
All right, next question.
Good evening, fantastic lecture, Isa. I think one of the problems with memory is that the people with the memory, we just put, I think, 5 of them on the screen, are going over the rainbow. We are losing, I don't know if we're losing memory because of what we're talking about the oral history. When I try to do research, I boot up against it because a lot of what we have is oral. We're oral people. We always have a story to tell. And it's not been captured and written down for this present society. So I'm talking to a friend of mine in Tobago who says to me, he's a little older than me and he doesn't have the information. So he's going to an elder. He comes back and says, hey, the lady died. So I say, well, I'm sorry I don't get the information, but I'm even more sorry for your society because she's gone and no one has captured the information. I'm talking to people across the region for a particular piece of research I'm doing, and most people answer me, I don't know. So we are losing the memory, which is another component of this whole memory discussion, that the elders are going and we're not interacting. We may be sensitized here to interact with them, but what of the young people who are on the devices and don't see the value of sitting down with their grandparents? Maybe when they get older and they realize, oh my God, she's gone now and I've missed the opportunity. So we also have that component of losing the memory.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're very right. Yes. And there needs to be a reorientation in terms of just capturing and seeing people as valuable. So many times on HTS or DBS, you have centenarians who've lived during particular periods in St. Lucia, and no one does an interview beyond saying this person has celebrated their 100th birthday. It also asks us, what is our vision for information, culture, and identity? How do we value the elderly in the society too? That will also tell a tale. And the status of our institutions, like our libraries, says a lot, because we don't think that, some of us don't think that there's something important about being a St. Lucian if you ask them. So if you don't think you're valuable, why should you capture the story?
Okay, we'll be taking 3 more questions.
Speaking of memory, so I'm not asking a question, I'm making a statement. And I know Leslie's looking at me hard because she's wondering, she would be surprised if the regulars didn't get up, So she's looking at us hard, but you had enough, Leslie. You didn't really need the regulars tonight. Memory. I have been coming to those lectures since its inception. I want to tell you, young lady, this was a brilliant lecture by you. And I have listened, as I said, I've attended many of them. And that is why I would like to throw out a suggestion to Leslie and her team. If the next time, can we do something with taking those lectures and taking a snippet of the most salient part of your lectures while you were presenting, and give us a documentary thing, just show us little clips of each of our, a reel, yes, look, my colleague helping me, of our presenters over the years. I've only missed 3 of them, and due to work, travel duty, and one, I couldn't come into St. Lucia, but I tried to be here. Well, I try to be here, let me tell you, the family. I try to always attend because of what Pat did for us. You see, for us, UWI distant education was a campus for us. We were here, and Pat made us feel like we were before we moved on, ventured into Mona and those places. She made it important for us. And for that, we were so grateful to you guys for coming up with this lecture that we have made it our business to always attend. So I think if we can have memory to store those lectures, because those lectures have been really good, and I'm not disappointed again tonight. If you can do something like that, so the next time we hear that this is open to people here and abroad to see what this is all about. There won't be room in here to put people in, because this is a valuable tool. The topics have been varied and they're very, very important. And I think that it's just my suggestion. As a regular, you know, before I go, like some of our regulars are not here because of ill health, before that happens to me. So please, if that can be considered, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy you did, right? You know, sometimes you're preparing something, you say, I wonder if they like it. Will they get it?
All right, we're going to hear from Dr. Oji first. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Barbara.
Yes, Dr. Oji.
So I stood up afterwards because it was excellent. And hearty congratulations. Pat would be proud. It's not often that I go to a lecture and agree with 99.9%. And I can't really find a 0.1% to disagree with, but I abhor absolutes. So I just want to tell you I agreed with 99.9% of the lecture. So thank you very much. That's not terribly important, except that you started with the business of memory, something that disturbs me greatly because I think we're losing it. Madam, we are the elders. If you have any doubt, check your birth certificate. We are the elders. But I'm very glad that you are teaching history. I'm very glad that you're teaching history at the age that you're teaching it. And I'm hoping that the enrollment numbers are not declining, that there's actually an interest in history / memory, because I worry greatly that it is leaving us forever, to the point where people are not really interested in having the conversation or conversations about what was, because we are increasingly unaware of what was or its importance, or how we have arrived at the points that we now occupy as St. Lucians, Caribbean people, post-colonial societies, post-independent societies. And I remember saying in one of the lectures I gave recently that the great sadness of the Caribbean, of contemporary Caribbean thinking, is that we have arrived and it's somehow turned out okay. But it hasn't turned out okay. It's not even close to okay. And at least in my little world, it's receding. And I will just give two very quick examples. I was interviewed by a journalist earlier this week. She was 35, and I turned down the music, which was, as it usually is, inappropriate for the elders. And I put on Ralph Robertson, who is a jazz pianist from Trinidad, with whom I've had the honor of appearing. And I mentioned casually, oh, this is Ralph Robertson's music, and he specialized actually in jazz interpretations of Kitchener's calypsos. She looked at me blank. She's a journalist and she's 35. She looked at me blank. She did not know who Kitchener was. Don't laugh. don't laugh because it's very, very serious. And so I asked her, but surely you've heard of the mighty sparrow. Yeah, I think so. Can you hum even one sparrow tune? And she couldn't. No, she couldn't. And I mean, I have multiple stories, but I'm trying to be brief. I'm also trying to say we are in crisis as societies because our history is going, it's disappearing. When I learned of Soroy Oje's death, my first thought was, oh no, there's stuff I still had to ask him, which I will now never know. But not to ramble, I want to say thank you again. Pat would be proud. One of the conversations I had ongoing with Hazel MacDonald was this whole willingness to speak about issues like memory that are leaving us. And my question to you is, do you think that we're also losing the vocabulary?
We are.
To have the discussion, to think about, do we still have the language, the terms of reference, the memory to speak about the memory, to know what is lost, to want what is lost? To me, even that is passing from us, and this is absolutely unforgivable because we have not arrived, and it is not okay by any means.
Well, you said we are in crisis, sir, but some people don't even realize we are in a crisis, and that's part of the crisis itself, that you don't even know that you're in one. You spoke about schools, and I need to touch on the schools matter. Enrollment cannot be high at the tertiary level because at the primary level, there isn't a focus on history in schools. There isn't St. Lucian history in schools. We have traumatized our children in the teaching of history to believe that history is only about enslavement, and so there is an aversion to it. My students have even told me that the way that they were taught it by persons who are no longer passionate about history, because some of our persons who are instructors now, and it's not all of them, are not passionate about it. And certain vocations, if it is you do not love it, you will create destruction in teaching it to other persons. So that's an issue. We have the phenomena where we believe that we are being smart and progressive by only teaching technical subjects because that's what the brilliant people do. Technical subjects are important, but a carpenter and a mechanic needs to have a social conscience too. They need to know who they are. So when you eliminate social studies, when I was at secondary school, it was mandatory that you know about the society. It's not mandatory anymore, neither history. And parents and employers are saying that's not what we need to work. Because right now in St. Lucia, the thrust of our society is not creating a better citizen. It's about getting someone we can employ, who can do the task that we want from 9 to 5. But then, when we have to live with each other, we are bored of people that we are. Because the things that we thought were unimportant are the very things that we are lacking in terms of hospitality, being understanding and considerate, being less violent, being able to communicate and respect that I am a St. Lucian just like you, and because I am a St. Lucian just like you, I value you the same way. I also wanted to say that urgency for change to happen, the same way if all of us knew we were going to die tomorrow, a lot of things would do quick. We're living under the premise that we have time. We're already behind time. So even with Koyo, some people tell me, you know, you're such an expert. Humbly, I must say I am not. What makes me different is that I want to learn about it and I respect it. And even when I say things, I go back and ask, is this the way you say it? Does it have the same colloquial meaning? Because to speak Koyo is not just to speak it, it's to live it, it's to think about it and sing about it in a particular way and have the experience of living among Creole people to fully understand it and want to go deeper into that world and getting the resources to have it. We have some resources, but we don't believe in books. We don't believe that people need to read anymore. And so that the work that has already been done is shelved. It's in some box, in some research, even in the research institutions that I mentioned that Pat worked at. They're shelved somewhere. They've gone out of production. They're not resources that we think are valuable to be used by curriculum officers. And so you have a treasure, but you treat it like mold. And so no continuous work can happen on it. It's not even on your priority list for development work. And as I said, even for a Ministry of Culture, if we are honest as St. Lucians, we do not have one. We do not have one. And until and unless we have one, we can do the work of engaging persons to do the work of inspiring, creating the institutions, because the public service as it was not created for an independent St. Lucia. It was for a colonial office to function as it needed to be.
So, just quick follow-up. So what do you think of the society's ability to renew itself?
There is possibility to renew itself, but it has to happen not in a silo, and it has to be consistent. There are just too many breaks. While I mentioned in my piece, because I wanted to be fair to see what changes were actually happening, yes, we've done the work for emancipation. We're starting it, we're rekindling things. But where can I get the information that we just did? It's stored nowhere. Who's doing the work? And we have the same laborers in the vineyard doing all the work all the time, and they are going to be engaged in burnout because there is plenty of work, but not enough laborers in the vineyard, not enough specialists, not enough anthropologists. We do not value historians, and people who do this work suffer the loss of their families, of viability, because they need to eat too to survive. So if we want it to be a priority, then it will be. I had the experience, was it last year, May, of traveling to Barbados because they had a special workshop on safeguarding heritage. Culture is in the office of the Prime Minister and receives millions of dollars. They've invested in the material to document their resources, to preserve it, to send persons abroad to study it, and to bring researchers to assist them. What have we done with ours? The only time we care about historical record is when somebody wants to fight for land, but nobody wants to find out where did I come from? Are my roots in Barbados? Is it in St. Vincent? Why do I have the name that I have? Why is my community called what it's called? And I think the way I think, and when I hear some people sing certain songs, there was a song that Burna Boy sang, I said, but he really sounds like a Lucian. Why is that? These are the kinds of inquiries we have to make.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so we move on to next questions. We have space for 3 more questions. Let's be brief. Go ahead.
Hi.
Yeah, we had to make an adjustment.
All is love, all is love, all
We
our
had to
way is
make an
love.
adjustment,
Okay.
but in good spirits, we will facilitate everyone. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a question, it's just an observation. You know, one gets increasingly more cynical for some of the very same reasons that we spoke about tonight. The loss of memory, the fact that we're in a crisis and we don't realize it, and the fact that those who should know that we are in a crisis are not even aware that we are. And I lament the fact that over time, successive administrations treat culture, as Raisa said, as window dressing, as decoration, as something you pull out and you hang it up at certain times. And so what is the conception we have of culture and memory and the role that it plays in our understanding of ourselves? And why is it that there is not that appreciation that culture in and of itself deserves its own house, its own room, its own resources, and continuity, you know, in terms of the nexus between culture and education, the nexus between culture and business, you know, as opposed to a narrow conception of celebrations. So then we boil it down to events, first to put on our bellwad and our soulier and our costumes, and for us to make spectacle, you know, and pleasure ourselves for a minute, or create entertainment for visitors. So that is a thing that concerns me. I don't know if there's a question in there, but it is the thing that makes us historically tack culture on. So based on which bigger brother ministry it is tacked on, it has a totally different purpose, you know. So now it's tacked to tourism. And interestingly, I have to be very careful what I say here, but interestingly, based on what ministerial polyglot it's within, then it is serving a particular purpose, but not for itself, of itself, and not for the preservation of memory, you know, and the documentation, and for in the next 10 years, for a St. Lucian child to wake up and understand that I am a St. Lucian, and this is what that looks like. This is what St. Lucian product sounds like. This is what our music is. This is how our stories are and what these stories mean. And that they can see their grandfather, their great-grandfather in the stories, but they can also see their grandchildren in the stories of yesterday. So that is a thing that it really makes me very cynical. I just thought I'd say that. Raisa might have something to say about that.
So,
Facilitator.
well, cynicism or feeling cynical is a feeling, right? Beyond the feeling, what do you want to happen? That's the next question. And based on what you said, I wanted to point out two things. The challenge is, and I've heard it about the Creole language too, people believe because they were not raised literate and they survived or did well, that it's not essential. So you have people living with the mindset that because they were not inheritors of the benefits of being able to speak, that it's not something worthwhile to pass on to anyone else. What cultural nonsense are you talking about? I have my car, I have arrived, I have material wealth. But the other things that are core that we lament and suffer from on our radio programs are tied to the things that we think are unimportant. And another question, and I hope I don't offend, but I hope to tell the truth. We are not really willing to do the work tied to pushing culture forward, right? It requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of dedication. Many people will show up for the dance, but to clean up after the dance and to prepare for it, we're not willing to do that. So you have to have skin in the game. What is the sacrifice that you're willing to put forward to make sure that that work is done? It's a lot of work, but you can attach yourself to one particular thing. You have done great work in a particular field, you've learned about it, have you written about it? When I decided to do the MPhil in Kudme, nobody had written about it before in that particular way or seen it as having political value, but it was my contribution to St. Lucia. So I said someone someday would read and know what Kudme was and where it was founded and its contribution, and it would build from there. So sometimes we imagine that the work that we want to achieve will happen overnight. It won't, but we have a part to play in making a contribution towards it.
Okay, at this point, so let's give it up for our facilitator. I'm just going to read a comment from our YouTube audience. That is a comment from Alvinus Melius, who said, we, and I quote, "We as a people do not place correct value on our data. In a digital age that has made it possible to not only store, but share and interrogate this data. These indeed are symptoms of trauma." That's a comment from our YouTube audience. You care to comment?
It is true. We don't place immense value on data or information, but even in our homes, right? Let me ask a question. How many of you know where your birth certificate is? Remember? How many of you know where your birth certificate is? Eh? You know where it is? You know where your passport is? Okay. It's on your phone. It's on your phone, okay. Do you store physical bills? You still store physical bills? Store physical bills, like hard copy. No? 1 month. 1 month. I still get physical. Okay. Let me ask another question. Do you have with you, from either a past family member, do you have with you, from a past family member, a photo or something that you cherish that belongs to them? Not with you now, I mean like at home. You keep it. And why do you keep it? Just memories? Because it's irreplaceable? So part of the issue of not storing data is that you don't think it's important that you will need it, or that it functions and it's tied towards you. And again too, coming back to
the value of culture memory. Somebody said, but what's the value of that? So many people have thrown away things that were invaluable because they didn't know the value of it. But if someone told them today it was worth $1,000, they would go and find it wherever it was. So it's the shifting value we place on things. So monetary worth is valuable to us, but the sentimental. So later on in life, somebody said, but who was your mother? Or who was your grandmother? Can you tell me about her? Do you have a photo of her? Well, she had long, but you don't have any photo of her? What did she do? What was the impact of the work that she did? There are so many St. Lucians who have stories of a family member who did some extraordinary work, but they never paid attention to it, but it is of national significance or importance. But it's based on what we actually value.
All right, thank you. So we're going to have a question from Ms. Wallace.
Thank you and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Adrian, I'm not sure if this is any comfort to you, but the Southwest Community College did introduce a compulsory history course. Is it the history of St. Lucia, right, sir?
A survey of St. Lucia,
Survey of St. Lucia history.
And heritage.
So students are not choosing it as a major, but we had to make it compulsory because we saw the kind of citizen that we were producing. I'm not sure if it's as effective as it should be, but it's there. And I think UWI too has a Caribbean civilization that is compulsory. So in that sense, something is being done, and I think we have to influence that. So that leads to my question, and I don't know if it can be answered tonight, but I'm worried about who determines his memory. When you speak about the 7 times British, 7 times French, that we push as something positive. When you talk about repetition being so important, when the images that we see of ourselves are always selling the coconut to the tourist or being the waitress, and I'm saying that softly. So these repeated images, repeated slogans, that becomes memory. So if we are allowing, and it's following Barbara's point, that a particular ministry is responsible for that and is pushing that, who is going to change what we decide becomes memory? And is it just this little group here, this chorus? So I know it's individual, I know it's collective as well, but I think, and Esther and I were saying that, somebody has to take, not somebody, some entity, there has to be a leader in determining memory.
But it has to be collective, as you rightfully said. And the challenge is that we have not written our memory. And the memory that we have inherited is that which has been written for us already. A number of times, if we do not write a story, there cannot be any contesting option. If you don't write a story, there can never be a contesting option to say an alternative exists. And the challenge is so much of what we say about ourselves cannot be found anywhere else. So we assume that the world knows. And for 400 plus years, the persons who had the authority or the access to power to write wrote and consistently. And so our challenge must now be to write, to prove, and to share, and to share, and to share. And the other challenge is and rewrite. A repatriation too of the documents that they have so that we now can say, this is why we are also saying what we are saying, because a number of things that I perhaps wanted to share with this lecture, I don't have access to, because it's in some French or maybe British museum, something that I don't have access to right now. And also, coming back to safeguarding, and that's something that we have a responsibility for. So many of our records have gone to natural disasters, to fires, and to human negligence. So many times when institutions are set up, we don't do any backup. There's no national policy that mandates, that I am aware of, I'm subject to correction, that particular historical documents must be scanned, preserved, and stored in a particular place. And even if the institutions that have mandates for various protections, the resources that they receive isn't for preservation or safeguarding, it's just for their basic operations. And so it's like, it's a lion without teeth. You want me to preserve history and memory, but there is not even sufficient project funding to do a project where I can go out and do the work that I need to do. So I'm handicapped, I exist in name, but my functionality is poor. And I'm hoping I'm not going to get into more trouble too, because I mentioned the Ministry of Culture, and I have tremendous respect for those persons who work there. But we have to expand and do better. We have to be able to say that we can do better, and we deserve to do better.
Okay, so we'll take our final question.
Oh, wow. So this is my first time attending, and I must say excellent.
Welcome, thank you.
So I want to just capture quickly your presentation, and I wrote excellent mélange of music, culture, Creole, and pure l'histoire. Excellent. I want to look at was it a phrase that you coined? I'm not sure if it's you or has it been researched, the hotel children. It has been researched? No, but you coined it. So excellent, because it's something that resonates with me. And there's so much happening at our school, and I speak here as an educator, where we have so many hotel babies, I call them. And I want you to advise us, or the policymakers, what can you advise us to do? How can you help us? Something. How will we deal with the hotel children that we have at our schools?
Wow. What a deep, I feel like I'm a social service worker. Wow. In thinking about it, the discussion on hotel children emerged from a discussion of a friend of mine who spoke about her sister who had to leave for work, and her son was left to his own device, and he would get into trouble because there was no one really there to parent or to manage him. And it comes back to the hotel industry, not just the hotel industry, looking at our labor laws in general and the autonomy that industries are given to work. Are these fair conditions of work, particularly when people have children? When you think about equity and inclusion, do we really factor in parents? And I don't think that we think about that much at all. And it would need a reform of these institutions seeing it as valuable, and government also engaging in saying that that's not an equitable working hour for somebody to start work at 6 a.m. in the morning and then end at 10. But it requires a broader discussion too at the educational level for support for these children as well, and social services, which is another ministry that requires tremendous overhauling in St. Lucia to really meet the needs of the society, and it's not really doing it right now. But it is enough to say that they do exist, and that is not good enough for people to live their lives in a hotel to the neglect of their children and their families, because it is having irreparable damage. And even in terms of the structures, I haven't heard of any hotel that provides, for example, services where children can come to work and parents can say, I can come in. They have a what? Oh, okay. A preschool? But beyond that, there's an opportunity for persons to work safely and know that their children are also safe. And safe does not just mean you are at home and yes, your doors are locked, but you have someone to care for you, to manage, and that's sometimes the challenge of the educator, because you're given homework, you have to go back, there's duty, there's care, there's someone to oversee what you're doing, and if they're not there, then you're also going to be vulnerable to persons who know that your mother and father are working at the hotel, and I'm going to pray on you. Yes.
All right, so okay. All right, so with that last question, we wrap up the Q&A segment, and let's give a round of applause to our facilitator. I think we can all attest that she did a fantastic job tonight elucidating culture, memory, and I don't know about you, but I have a lot of notes to take home and some quotes that I will put in my status. The last quote that I will leave with you is a quote from the presentation, which says, "World powers optimize the cultures to display power and autonomy to the outside world." And I think for us, this lecture has been an opportunity for us to re-identify ourselves with our roots, and for us to display our culture so that our culture can be our power wherever we go.
I thank you very much, and I pass over to Mrs. Leslie Green Mitchell, who will take us to the next leg of this event.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. And I just want to add my own voice. Everybody who stood up to speak thanked you, but I cannot thank you enough for having accepted. At the beginning, I teased you and said that you were going to be added to this eminent list, but I think we can all agree that Raisa has more than earned her place and that you have done Mrs. Charles proud. And what I would like to now do is just to give Raisa a little token to say thank you and to ask a member of the Charles family to please come forward. And Raisa, please come to the front.
No problem, no problem.
The front.
I see something I love in there, pineapple. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So thank you so much again, Raisa. And now to do the formal vote of thanks, I invite Mr. Erlen George to the podium. All right.
You could hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just before I do the vote of thanks, Raisa, in your presentation on memory and also Kudme, it allowed me to reflect just a little on my experiences. And I think I'm a product of Kudme because from very young I was actually, thank you. I grew up in a family community, and when my parents were ready to build, I was able to see the entire community actually come together to help my parents build. And that in turn happened for everybody else in the community. So I was able to actually experience that. That is something that you don't see every day. So I actually have an appreciation for the value of Kudme in society. Additionally, I have no recollection, unfortunately, of my grandparents' parents. I was told by my mom that after my great-grandmother died, my grandmother would cry every single day, and then one day my grandfather got so upset that he took the bag with all of the photos and he threw it away. Oh. So we have no recollection, unfortunately, of that part of the family. And also, my family's surname, from what I understand, is Henry. However, there are several other persons, same brothers, sisters, and they have surnames like Israel and Joseph and Patience and Evans, and we have no idea where these surnames came from or how they came to be. Like every time someone, an older person passes and we go through their records, then you get a new surname and you're like, but how exactly did this surname came to be? All of us knew we were Henry, so like what exactly happened? So it just brought back those flashbacks for me and how important it is to document things, because right now it would be very difficult for me to go back a couple generations.
That's a whole Teleperry document you have to do, you know.
Yes, so I will proceed with my vote of thanks, but thank you very much everyone for indulging me. So, bonsoir tout le monde.
Bonsoir.
Using the example of the lecturer this evening, who I aspire to be as fluent in Creole as one day, moi ka dire ti mot a Creole pour offrir ti merci. On behalf of the UWI Global Campus, St. Lucia, it's coming, it's infused in there. And in partnership with the JQ Charles Group of Companies, I extend heartfelt gratitude to each of you for being here this evening. This 11th Patricia Charles Memorial Lecture has been nothing short of profound. Let me first acknowledge with great respect Dame Colette Louise, Governor General Emerita, Ambassador Honorable Dr. June Summer, Her Excellency Ambassador Leif Escalona, Embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Her Excellency Ambassador Nicole Su, and Third Secretary E. Wen Chu, Embassy of the Republic of China, Taiwan, Dr. Marjorie Jameson Charles, Principal of the Sarfa Lewis Community College, Mr. Ember Charles, Chair of the FRC, faculty, adjunct lecturers, staff of SALCC and UWI, colleagues across the region, and of course, our friends and supporters in the room and online. Merci Putazot, Pupezas Zot, Epi Pu Lamuzot Ni Pupeinu. To our extraordinary lecturer this evening, which I will gladly stick a pin in and also say, and my friend, Miss Raisa Joseph, thank you for your brilliance, depth, and honesty. You invited us not to just remember, but to reflect and to reclaim. You reminded us that people cannot live without memory, for it is the compass of life, and that if we do not mind our memory, others will shape it for us. We were stirred by your invocation of Kudme, of the unsung rhythms of community, and of the cost of forgetting, especially when our stories, our language, our land, and even our children are at stake. Epi pusa mem mwekawu lelang mwe pudi atimo akweyol. You reminded us that St. Lucia is not just a destination, it is one that is still becoming. And to the woman whose legacy we honor this evening, Patricia Charles, may her life continue to inspire us to protect what matters, our heritage, our people, and our purpose. And most especially to her family, Mr. Gordon Charles, Mrs. Linda Auger, Dr. Adrian Auger, and family members joining us online. Merci Ashai. Thank you for continuing to share Auntie Pat's legacy with us. Your presence and support breathe life into her memory. This lecture is not simply an event, as our speaker reminded us, but a living tribute. And through her work and values, we continue to learn what it means to serve with grace, lead with integrity, and care deeply for our community, St. Lucia. Merci, Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, cultural custodian and national icon, for your invocation this evening. Merci, Mrs. Leslie Crane Michel, head of UWI Global Campus St. Lucia, for your introductions and reflections. Merci, Mrs. Sigufani Bryan, Outreach and Marketing Officer, for your thorough introduction of our lecturer this evening and also gracing us with your red dress. Merci, Mr. Siobhan Bryan, President of the UWI Global Campus Toastmasters Club, for your masterfully moderated question and answer session. AP, a grand merci to all who made this evening possible. The organizers, volunteers, speakers, moderators, tech team, Mekai Tiwe Shapomwe Baizot. And to you, the audience, both here and online, Muevle, we merci you for leaning in and for allowing this moment to shape you. As we leave, I invite us to carry this lecture not just in our minds, but in our decisions, in our citizenship, and in our collective kudme. Bodie Benio, Bonnuit, epi anu vive memoanu, epi courage. Merci tout le monde, merci à pile.